see. Laser. Ooh, there we go. I like it. There you go. Really gets people rattled. Yeah. I tell people here, we do that once every few years, Change of Seat Sunday. It's like a personality test for the whole church. Okay. All right, folks. Well, we're going to go ahead and get rolling. So thanks to 10 for coming out. So I go to Ukraine. The inspiration behind this, if my mother-in-law and father-in-law, Art and Kathy, can wave, they're over there under the flags. They're the inspiration behind this whole thing in a very real way. They did, if my memory is right, I think they did about 15 trips over 15 years to Kenya, or 10, something like that. And they developed a long-term relationship with short-term trips while they were still ministering, serving in Minneapolis, but the Lord had something kind of out of the box for them over many years in Kenya. So anyway, a few years ago, I started praying about that, and I knew here at Calvary we'd need to have, staff team in place and everything. So there's kind of a time and place for everything, but I'd been praying about Ukraine in particular. I'd probably been following the war there. It actually started in 2014. And so I'd been praying, Lord, would there ever be a window to go and do something of purpose? I'd never really done much for short-term mission trips. The church has. The teams had gone to Haiti and Mexico for years and South Africa, but I'd only been to one Mexico trip. But it just felt like it was time, the time was right, to ask the Lord if there'd be something kind of outside my own box. So part of it is we have been long-term partners with a lady named Pam DeAndre. Pam's been here. She was 30 years in Ukraine as a faith community nurse. And so she was back visiting a few summers ago, and she said, well, we're training, or I asked, would there be any assignment that would be a meaningful ministry for a guy with my background to do in Ukraine? She said, we're training chaplains. And I served 14 years with the Sheriff's Department as a volunteer chaplain. So that conversation led to another. And to go to Ukraine, because it's in a war zone, the EFCA, Evangelical Free Church of America, that we're part of, wouldn't take me as a volunteer because of insurance liability reasons. So what happened was I had to go through the full hiring process, training process. Honestly, if I'd have known how much work it was going to be at the beginning, I don't know if I would have had courage to do it. But sometimes you stumble into things and you find out along your way. So I was able to go last spring in May for about a 2-week trip, and this year was a 3-day trip. So just to kind of refresh memory, Ukraine was under Soviet domination during the Soviet era, and when the Berlin Wall came down and the Soviet Union collapsed, they regained political independence. But Russia and the Kremlin, particularly in the Putin era, have really tried to maintain some sort of control management over Ukrainian affairs. So back in the early 2000s, there was some political upheaval, including the Russian government meddling with Ukrainian elections. And there was, I think it was around the year 2013, I'd have to double check my notes, but what was called the Orange Revolution, basically a popular protest rising up against pretty corrupt government. And the president at that time was a guy named Yanukovych. He fled the country and went to Russia. And the following year, 2014, is when Russia started infiltrating. Maybe you remember the stories. They called them the little green men. Basically men without uniform designation of who they were. So Russia began kind of a quiet infiltration takeover of the southern region, which is called Crimea, down. I'll get my pointer on. So this is the Crimean Peninsula. That was the first area really taken over, and they started infiltrating in this eastern region. So last year when I went, our team could only go in the capital city, Kyiv, which is a city of many million people. It'd be like going to a major metropolitan area in the U.S., up here in the north. And this year, we were able to travel the country, so we were in a city over here called Rivne, about 2 hours away from Poland. And then we were in a northern city, Chernihiv, near Belarus. We were in Kyiv as well. And we wrapped up our time down in Dnipro, down in this region. So to get there, you can't fly into Ukraine. You have to go into Poland or one of the neighboring nations and then take a train in. So it kind of adds to the travel time. So it's when you get there, you kind of want to stay a while and make it worth the trip. So this is how much of current Ukraine is under Russian occupation. It's 20% of the land mass. There'd be about 3 million Ukrainians who are living under occupation right now. So understand when they talk about, what could they do? What would they trade for peace? It's not just land, although no country in the world wants to give up 20% of their property, but you are talking about 3 million Ukrainian citizens who live there. A lot of times the people who are left are those who don't have capacity to leave. So high percentage elderly, high percentage poor. And the front line is kind of a mushy front line. You hear terms in the news like trench warfare, and there are trenches, but it's not exactly like World War I area because of the whole drone situation. The front line is wide and permeable, is maybe the best way to describe it. This is Steve Smeltzer. Steve is doing this as his retirement gig. He worked 35 years in banking and tech and IBM, and he's lived in Riyadh and London and Indonesia, and he grew up in West Texas. He's a funny guy, but a great guy, loves the Lord, very accomplished world traveler, and after his retirement said, Lord, what could I do? And he been part of a free church in California for a couple of decades and was familiar with what's called crisis response. So crisis response, like the name would imply, is free church mission people who go in the follow-up of hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, fire, and in this case, war zones. So Steve has been doing this kind of, not exactly full-time, but probably 3/4 time for 4 years. This was his 19th trip. And so he's become quite familiar with a lot of churches and a lot of ministries and a lot of pastors across Ukraine. So my schedule daisy-chained with him because he knows what he's doing. And but he's been very involved in helping train what we would call church lay leaders to minister to vets and displaced people. Prior to the war, the Ukrainian military did not have a structured official chaplaincy. Now that move has been made, and there are actually now several hundred credentialed military chaplains, but alongside them, what Steve and the Free Church has been doing has been training pastors and lay leaders to do chaplain-type ministry, especially in hospitals or with vets who, when they return, there'll be high levels of everything you don't want from war, PTSD, addiction, family trouble, just everything that comes in the aftermath of a long deployment. So when the Berlin Wall came down in the 90s, every church ministry and parachurch organization in the world wanted to get into Eastern Europe. So in the 1990s, Campus Crusade, InterVarsity, Navigators, the Baptists, the Assembly of God, Independent Charismatics, every group in the world went into Ukraine and the rest of the Soviet bloc empires. and especially a lot of ministry was going on college campuses. So most of the pastors that I met were in college in the 90s, came to Christ and started planting churches. And most of those churches would be small by U.S. standards, anywhere from 30 to maybe 130 people. A lot of what we would call storefronts. Some of them would be part of larger networks, a lot of Baptists, a lot of Assembly of God, a lot of independents, and most of the pastors would have other occupations to pay the bills, make ends meet. And some of them would be pastoring multiple churches. But every church in the country has been scrambled by the war. So picture if it was Calvary, picture if like maybe, if we had 400 people here today, picture 100 moved to another part of the United States, and then picture another 150 moved to Europe, and then maybe we get a bunch of new people from the war zone, and half of your staff and leadership is gone. So, Mark's out of the picture, and maybe Matthew's gone, and Chris is your new lead pastor. That's the kind of uprooting and scrambling and scattering that's happened in churches all over the country. Now, I was in the western part I showed you on the map. This is what it would look like in parts of occupied territory. This is Mariupol in the south. And it'll be a generation to rebuild whenever the war's done. And some of those people aren't coming back because it will be easier for them to stay put in Norway or Germany or Alberta or wherever they're at than to come home. So one of the ironies in this is that Ukraine had a higher percentage of evangelical believers than probably any country in Europe. Now, as a high percentage, that might be 3 to 5% of the population. It's historically Russian Orthodox, or Greek Orthodox, or Eastern Orthodox, now Ukrainian Orthodox. But Steve told me at one point the country is 95% Orthodox and 50% atheist. So you can do the math. There would be a lot of people for whom it would be a Christian nation, cultural Christianity. I was baptized there. I go for holidays and ceremonies. There's not necessarily a biblical discipleship game plan in a lot of the churches. That wouldn't be 100%, but that would be a lot of people's church experience. This is in a place called Donetsk, similar situation where I would say by modern standards, a Russian approach to war is fairly primitive. Burn it all down to the ground with artillery. And so at the beginning of the war, there was a lot of propaganda that they were going to clear out the Nazis. Like Steve said, he's been there 19 trips. He has yet to meet his first Nazi in Ukraine. What Ukraine does have is an awful lot of natural resources. It's a breadbasket of Europe. It's like driving across Iowa, honestly, rich farm country. But it's also rich in natural resources. The European Union has identified 22 strategic resources any nation needs, things like natural gas, lithium, iron ore, it's a long list. Ukraine has those resources in 22 out of 30 to the tune of $26 trillion. Now, to put that in perspective, Vladimir Putin has robbed his own nation to the tune of about 160 to 200 billion. And so now he's ready to rob another country. And historically, Ukraine has always sat on this borderland between Western Europe and Russia, and those empires have been fighting back and forth for 1,000 years. So there are times when Ukraine has been a very difficult place to live, to put it mildly. So anyway, we hop a train in. We got on in Warsaw, Poland. We train in. This was the first church that we were in, a city called Rivne. This is called Temple of God, Temple Church. Interesting, it's an evangelical church that's particularly trying to reach the Jewish community in their large city. So they worship on Saturdays. And stayed with Pastor Oleg there. It's really cool to worship in a church where you don't speak the language, because you find out how much body and face communicates. So someday I'll preach about that. What does your face communicate on Sunday morning if I don't understand your English? It's a beautiful time of year there, and you know the ironic thing about this is you're in a country that's war, and across vast swaths of it, it looks like life is normal. Tulips are up, gardens are planted, kids are in school, business is open, coffee shops are busy, church is going on every day, you know, and then your phone will go off and tell you which counties the missiles or the drones are flying at. But they really have been done living in the basement for a long time. So a tremendous amount of ordinary life is going on, even though millions of people have left the country and been displaced and been deployed. You do see different evidence of the war anywhere. But a lot of what you would see looks like people just trying to live ordinary life. So it's very inspiring in that way. I've got a low power mode coming up, so this might be a shorter presentation than we thought. These are faculty. That's Pastor Oleg of that prior church that we visited. This is a church I preached in the following day, again in Rivne. It's Pastor Misha. Congregation of about 100. Half the songs they worshiped were ones you would know, except for the Ukrainian vocabulary part. But I preached the message I preached here, How to Be No Help at All, out of Job on Elihu. That's the message I preached there that Sunday. This is his son, who is my interpreter. He did a fine job. Most of the younger generation are learning to speak English. The country has been making a pivot to the West for 30 years, and older people will speak Ukrainian and Russian. Younger people will speak Ukrainian and English, because of not only to engage with Americans, but they can take that in business world anywhere on the planet. And so from age 40 on down, on an awfully high percentage, speak at least some degree of English. This is a war memorial. You can't see it very good. It's pretty small there, but you see these in every city, parks, memorial locations, flags, pictures, to like every single individual who's been lost or who's missing. And there are thousands in every city that are quite moving to stop and walk through and see the faces and names. This is Pastor Oleg of the first church we were at. He had kind of a little dormer that he had set up in his backyard for ministry groups to visit. So he's also a chaplain with the police, and the police department were willing to have him come in and do a ministry center in the basement of the police station. Now, the basement had been a dump ground for 30 years. So first he had to get all the trash out of it, but he turned it into a really beautiful ministry location for Bible study, English language, art therapy, a lot of great stuff going on there. This is called Freedom Square in central Kyiv. It's kind of a monument memorial, both to those from the popular uprising 14 years ago that wanted to clean up government and have a more democratic society, and also to the fallen. That's St. Sophia's Cathedral in the backdrop. Massive Orthodox cathedrals. They all have similar architecture, really stunning, beautiful, incredible. I don't know that it would work in our church construction project to do it that way, but this is another memorial wall at the same location. There's 2,000 faces on that wall. And what's interesting coming from a U.S. environment, we're used to, oh, thanks, Judith, great idea. We are used to sending off soldiers in combat who are aged 20 to 40, but when you're fighting for your homeland, it's more like every able-bodied male and plenty of able-bodied females. And so when you go to the memorial, they're really all ages. And there are a lot of young guys for sure, but there are plenty of guys on that wall my age or older. So I go through and just kind of scan them, and they give a little bit about each of them, their history, their background, their age, where they're from. And again, these are scattered all over the country. I just got to see if I can, oh dear. Great, I lost it. Uh-oh.
Is that an iPad?
I don't know, but it's not working now. Oh, there it goes. This plug does not seem to be working. Well, we'll just see what happens. Okay, where were we?
No, in this.
Oh.
The bottom where it looks in. Okay.
Maybe there's one up in the booth. Thanks, Judith. Okay, yeah, so like I said, this is in the city of Kiev. That's the Dnieper River behind me. It's about the size of Mississippi. It's huge. Beautiful city in a ton of ways. Tremendous park system. National monuments all over the city are skirted to protect them from shrapnel drones. So they're trying hard to save their national treasures. This is one random thing that I just got to throw in. They put pianos under gazebos all over their parks. It's really cool. And you'll sit down and you might find a teenager or an elderly person just playing classical piano under there. You would stay very busy. It's great, really. It's cool. This is a Shahed drone. You hear a lot about those in the news. They're mass-produced. They cost about $20,000. They're low tech by modern standards, but they're cost efficient because they'll fly them in by the hundreds. And you've heard of our Patriot missile systems. They're super high tech, but they're fairly pricey. And you can't shoot these down. You can't shoot down $20,000 drones with $3 million missiles. That math just doesn't work out. So the Ukrainians have come a long ways in learning to combat this event. And they've gotten really good at it. On an average night, they'll shoot down maybe 95% of them. And if you watch the news, they're always crashing into high-rise apartment buildings. And I was like, can't they hit anything? Well, the Ukrainians have gotten really good at electronic warfare, which screws up where they're going to hit because they don't want them hitting power plants and military targets. But every time they shoot one down or one goes haywire, it does have to come down somewhere. And if that hits your apartment, it doesn't destroy the building, but people do die. And that happens every night all over the country. That's just a statement on the drones. So this is just a picture from Mariupol. I don't know who that guy is. That was at a memorial. Just kind of telling the story in that Freedom Square. We visited, this is a ministry center, a Christian counseling center in Kiev that is trying to pop up new centers across the country. And they're doing particularly therapy for kids who've lost their dads, for widows, a lot of counseling and group type work that will be ongoing for a long, long time. This is a guy, he works with a music ministry. There's an organization called Music Ministry Kiev. It's a Christian organization that puts on classical concerts all over Europe. In fact, they're coming to the Eastern Seaboard here in July. And just a nice guy. He's not the musician. He's the administrator for the group. But we got to see him in concert. They're amazing. And he's relearning how to walk his dog in his neighborhood. Across the street, there's a cemetery, and a drone came down in it. And it didn't wreck the building, but it blew out a bunch of windows and traumatized a bunch of kids. So, you look at a city the size of Kiev, and honestly, when the drones fly over, most people don't run for cover. They're just kind of used to it, and frankly, your odds are 1 in a million. I tell people it'd be like if somebody got hit by a drunk driver going to Duluth tomorrow. You would feel bad about that, but if you had a trip to Duluth next week, you would go anyway, right? And that's kind of how they live. But when it's your neighborhood or your building, he's relearning how to walk his dog in his own neighborhood. Okay. Okay, we'll see what happens here. We'll see if we get some power. Oh, boy. This works. Give the lady a hand. Boom. Thank you, Judith. You saved the day. You see artwork all over the city. This is a display out on a public parkway where you'll be walking along a park path and there'll be like a long bulletin board the length of the building here. And it'll be just 10 high of artwork the whole way. And some of it's just fun stuff. Some of it's more war related. But you see a lot of stuff that clearly has spiritual connotations. They have seen in a lot of the churches people expressing spiritual interest who never would have without the war. And a lot of the churches have lost a lot of people, but also grown a lot. One area the church has really shined is in ministry to people who are dislocated and whose cities and towns have burned down, and they're looking for meals and work and a place to stay and all manner of help and need. That's from a big bridge. I don't know if you can see that. The Hague is waiting for you now. The likelihood of the Hague ever seeing Vladimir Putin is very unlikely, but I thought it was a good sign. And we're all going to meet God one day, and none of us know when, but we are all going to meet Him one way or the other. This is at Kiev Theological Seminary. Kiev being the capital is the home to several evangelical seminaries. This school it was planted by a Dallas seminary graduate about 30 years ago. Very established school, super solid faculty, and they're turning out pastors every year. But it's all in an upheaval because of the draft. They started with a class 3 years ago of 60 enrolled, and they're down to 5 still in the program for all manner of war-related issues. Last year, they went through most of the school year without heat and electricity, working on generators. There's a guy named Timothy. He was hoping to go see his in-laws for the first time in a year. They're on the other side of the country, and just travel gets pretty complicated. He's got a couple little kids, and he's a pastor. We had a chance to spend a weekend church retreat with an organization called New Life Church. They're one of the larger evangelical churches. They've got about 600-700 people, and they had about 150 out to camp for a weekend. And it was just what you'd expect from camp. It'd be like if we took 150 people up to Deeper Life. It was campfires and s'mores and Bible studies and worship. And they bring their dogs to camp. That was a little different. And this is the guy who's there, Sasha. He'd be in his mid-60s. His village got run over when they rolled in the tanks 4 years ago. And he wasn't in combat, but he was taken prisoner for 45 days. And he tries to get his wife out in the country a lot because the drones have really got on her nerves. I mean that in a mental health kind of way. And he said, you can't believe what being a POW does for your spiritual life when you think every day you may be going to heaven. So he got out, and now he's dealing with cancer. Chernobyl is not very far away from Kiev, and he worked there, he and his wife, for many years in cleanup after the nuclear incident. So now he's in a cancer battle, loves the Lord, had a great weekend out there. He's got a great sense of humor, really a great sense of humor. This was a worship service at one of the services, and it was just like being in a U.S. camp, only, it would help if you spoke Ukrainian, but, they're doing skits and comedy and singing songs, and they were preaching through the book of James. It was really fantastic. It was Mother's Day weekend. They did a knockout Mother's Day banquet at camp. I don't know how they pulled it off, but they do serve fish, just be warned, with the head on and the eyes in. So, try that out at your next family cookout. This is, what's that?
They eat the head and the eyes.
Some do. Yeah. Now, this guy's name is Brandon, and guess what? He's from Maple Grove. And he met his wife on eHarmony. And she's also up there on the worship band. I thought I had a picture of them and their baby here. Yeah. He had been back and forth. They were already married, and he flies into town, or he gets into the city 3 days into the tanks rolling in, and he lived for about a week in the subway with Ukrainians just giving him a bedroll and granola bars and fresh fruit as the war was started, because they had to relocate his mother-in-law, who's gone home to be with the Lord now. But they got a little baby, and I went all the way to Ukraine to meet a guy from Church of the Open Door. He knew Joel Hansen, if that name rings a bell for you. He's been up here. This would be kind of a classic little home in the country. If you're in central Kyiv, it's quite affluent. If you're out in a lot of the suburbs, it's very working class. If you go out in the country, a lot of poverty lives out there. A lot of people whose living is their own potato patch and chickens, and homes that would be maybe a third the size of this room would be pretty common. So communism does not leave a lot of prosperity behind in its path. So let's see, church retreat. This gal, Victoria, she was one of our interpreters. She's expecting in November. Her husband's been on the front for 4 years. He comes and goes. He'll get a few days break now and then. But pray for her. Pray for her hubby that he gets home safe. And, you know, like in any wartime, they're all worried about what their boys are like when they come home. And because the stuff they're dealing with won't be over when they get back. A farmer's got to take a picture of a combine. That one got whacked. Ukraine is a very, it's like driving across Iowa, incredibly fruitful farm country, but you don't see many farms out there. The communists drove all the people off the land, collectivized everything. Now it's all run by major corporations. Your most likely landowner is going to be like a senator who's got a lot. But so thankfully they have not had food shortages. This guy was an amazing story. He pastors a Nazarene church. His name's Andre. They got 3 biological kids and 3 foster kids. And he's been to the States many times for pastors' conferences. And he was at a pastors' conference in California 15 years ago. He said, God told me to start learning Spanish. He's like, why, God? And God was just like, start learning Spanish. There are 20,000 Colombian guys who hired on with the Ukrainian government to fight the war. And a bunch of those guys end up in military hospitals, which his wife visits, and she started dragging him along to be her interpreter. And now they've got a whole ministry going to Colombian soldiers who were stuck in Ukraine who had not much idea what they were really getting into. And now they're thinking when the war's done, they might go church planting in Colombia. The mysteries of providence. This is another pastor. He works at an evangelical theological seminary. He sent his boy off to the front line 3 months ago. They're hoping to see him again in November, maybe for a visit. But just a lot of people who are wishing their kids were home. And these are a couple other visitors from Minnesota I met while I was there. It's funny when you're gone from home a long time. I would go across the train, across the country, and I'd be like, they have ring-necked pheasants here. This feels like home. Or box blinds for deer hunting. This is the president of Kyiv Theological Seminary. You know, he's trying to pay the bills, keep the roof from leaking. They just press on with ministry. But they're planning now for next winter because the electrical power grid is a major league problem in the wintertime. So this is its city Chernihiv in the north near Belarus. Baptist congregation there. All the windows are new. 4 years ago, the city was surrounded by Russians. Building got hit by an artillery shell. Didn't knock it down, but it took out all the windows in the building. And so they got all new windows, but there's a lot of work that needs done. They're like, yeah, this wall's all messed up. Yeah, that's still from the shrapnel. And this dent in the wall, that's where the pulpit flew into the wall. And the thing they run into is shortage of building materials and shortage of skilled labor. Because all over the country, what you do find is a real shortage of guys from age 20 to 50. They are elsewhere. We went out to a little village. This was just kind of unbelievable. We drove about an hour out of Chernihiv, this teeny little village 10 miles from the Belarus border. And this place was filled up mostly with elderly poor, mostly widows. That community center would have been like dedicated to Marxism back in the early 80s. And I preached Isaiah 55 in it, and we had church. And we had a worship service, and they came out, and there was a food distribution. And just people with not two nickels to run together. This is what their cars look like. Most of their bicycles are older than I am and held together with duct tape. But boy, they persevere. I was pretty ticked off on the ride out there because we drove past a pasture and you don't see much livestock. And there was a dead cow in the field. They shot a drone and a chunk of it came down and hit the cow. And I know it's only a cow, but a cow in northern Ukraine is a lot bigger deal than a cow in North Iowa because it's somebody's income, and now it's hamburger. Driving out there, you saw a lot more evidence of the war, just more checkpoints and bunkers, and because this is the area that the tanks rolled down in 4 years ago. So most of these aren't manned now. A few of them are. There's some things they don't want you taking pictures of, but you'd be going across this big old wheat field, and then there'd be a half a mile of tank blockades and razor wires, and Ford F-150s with 50 cal machine guns waiting to shoot down drones. So they're in an area where they're a flyover area. A tiny little village like this isn't going to be much of a target, but it's got a lot of stuff flying over it every day and night. So this would be a big tank berm they dug up. This is what happens when your phone goes off. You get a map and it lights up. It'd be kind of like if you got a map of Minnesota and it tells you which counties the drones and missiles. And the stuff's gotten so high tech, anytime the Russians put stuff up in the air now, the Ukrainians know it. And they can identify what it is and where it's flying to. And their shoot down rate is pretty good, really good on drones, north of 90%. It's tougher when they shoot missiles because the Patriot missiles and that kind of stuff is in short supply with everything going on in Ukraine and now Iran. You don't just restock missiles real quickly when you run out. So this is that same church, and Thursday night we did youth group. Youth group every Thursday night. Looked like any American youth group, 30 kids full of wiggles, singing songs, Bible lesson, games. If the war starts, I don't know how long they took off, but sooner or later you just go back to youth work, and that's what they're doing all over the country. This is a pastor of the Chernihiv Baptist Church. He got saved back in the 90s too, and just salt of the earth guy. Just works his tail off to bless people and bless the neighborhood. These are tank blockade. This is one of the evidences of war you do see all over the place. They've got the tank blockades at intersections all over the country in case they need them, so they're ready to go. And maybe this is going to be over sooner than I thought because now it's saying low power again. So maybe although it says it's recharging. This is what the countryside looks like from a train. Again, great farm country. If you're from Iowa, southern Wisconsin, eastern North Dakota, it kind of feels like home. This was the second training session we did down in the south in the city of Dnipro. The first one we did in Chernihiv had about 35 people, church lay leaders. A bunch of social workers showed up for it. We had one full-time military chaplain too, and that was a 3.5-day training. And this one was just a day training, but Steve's hoping to get back there with the churches in that city. And really beautiful city down there. And again, these are all over the intersections. incredible park. Our hotel was across from like this park that had to have been a half a mile long. Goes down the Dnieper River. And, the drones fly over every night, and it's not that far away from the war zone. So I went out for a walk at sunset because we'd had a busy day and we'd been on the train all day and I needed to walk. I thought it'd be pretty quiet out. Boy, was I wrong. Park was full. People are walking their little dogs. Kids are all over the play equipment. Bicycles are out. There's kind of this night district where all the street cafes were packed. Like if you didn't have a reservation, you are not getting in. But by 10, 11 o'clock, everybody's back home, and that's about when things fire up. And so, again, you're in this really nice restaurant district, and these things are everywhere in case they need to pull them out to slow down the tanks. This was a view from the church there in Dnipro, and that tall building in the back is a Soviet-era missile factory. Church location is really important, right? If you're in a war zone a quarter mile away from a munitions plant, that is unfortunate location. Because it's still a factory, but the whole factory is buried underground now, but it gets targeted all the time. So we had a nice church service, and his church before the war had about 130 people in it. Now it's got about 30, and half of them are relocated there from somewhere else, so they're just kind of rebuild mode. But this is the pastor and his church leadership, and that's the apartment building that got hit by the rocket 3 weeks earlier. So if you get hit by a drone, you lose an apartment, but if you get hit by a missile, you lose the building. And that's kind of their life right now. And one of the hard things that happen is there'll be facility reconstruction, but family and church and community reconstruction is going to be very complicated because not everybody's willing to go fight. And they have severe troop shortages. And the way it works is every fighting age guy has an app on your phone, and when your app turns red, you're supposed to go in and check in. And some leave the country, and some go into hiding. I sat down and had lunch at the church with a 15-year-old guy named Max. And that afternoon, he and some other youth group kids were going to visit his brother, who's 27 and in hiding. And he's been in hiding a long time. So it's hard for us to get our mind around that because we've been a volunteer-only military since after Vietnam. And it's just hard to picture what that whole draft situation does to a society and how they'll ever put back all the broken pieces when it's all done. Going to be a lot of tough stuff ahead for them. Drones have totally changed the face of modern warfare. What used to be armor that would keep you safe from small arms fire now just makes you a rolling casket. So they take tanks and armored personnel carriers, all this stuff, and they rig it up with chicken wire and chain link so that the drones hit the fence before it hits you, and it doesn't work very well. But they're cranking out, I think, more drones now than anybody in the world, other than maybe China, I'm not sure. But the tide of the war is starting to change. They've been outnumbered the whole time, and in the beginning they were outgunned. But the Russian military is decayed from the inside by systematic corruption. Their troops get almost no training. They're handed junk. There was a story of one POW. In his week of basic training, he was given 2 bullets to fire through his rifle. And then they sent him to the front line to die. And they die at about 1,000 a day. They lost more troops. Russians lost more troops in April than they lost 10 years in Afghanistan. It's just a death machine designed by hell. So I pray for Ukraine, but I also pray for Russia that those boys will be able to go home. Because 400,000 of them are dead and 1 million are wounded. And the interesting thing here is Russia already had a demographic crisis. Their birth rates were already in the tank. So is their economy. And Putin and the oligarchs have just robbed them blind. And I have no idea what God is going to do in that nation. But what's going on now cannot last forever. It just can't. So, so some things, if you've tracked the war very closely, the Ukrainians are getting really good at hitting targets deep in Russia that have strategic value. And by that I mean mainly oil refineries, oil ports, naval ships, airfields. A lot of the Ukrainian Air Force has gotten clobbered while it's parked on the runway because they're afraid to fly it over Ukraine. But if they leave it on the runway, it ain't safe there either. So. And the human spirit comes up with art, even in the middle of war. So, let's see, are you going to advance for me? This was in a museum in the city of Dnipro, and those are anti-tank rocket canisters gathered up, and you find artillery shells used, and drones crashed, and all kinds of stuff that ends up getting turned into artwork. And it's just kind of interesting how humans get by. And particularly to me, the connection between suffering and creativity. And the counselors tell you that actually has an awful lot of value to the people who are doing it or sharing it. It's pretty important. That'd be some more. Whole museum was full of that stuff. I'm a farmer, so I had to take a picture of that. Yeah, and that's where on the Russian side, just a lot of their technology is so far behind, and their equipment is so outdated. If you remember 4 years ago when they rolled the tanks in, Putin said, we're going to take them over in a couple of weeks. And he was sure if they just rolled tanks in that the Ukrainians were just going to all cave and it was going to be all done. And it didn't work out that way. Partly because the Ukrainians learned they could take down road signs and the Russians would be lost because their own military did not have global positioning units like you have in your car available for the average tank commander. And not only that, they didn't have encrypted communication, so they're making cell phone calls, which is a great way to end up dead in a hurry. So, so I don't know what God's got in store for the future of Ukraine, but it is also going to be fascinating to see what God has in store for the future of Russia, because some kind of change is on the way. This is a beautiful fountain in that park down in Dnipro. And this is getting on the train to go back. We had a half-hour delay, drones in the air. You got to wait. You can't get on the train. And then we got a 1-hour smoke break on the ride home. And,
was that a high-speed train?
No. Did they build high-speed trains in the 50s? Because that's what we're riding. It looked like something out of a James Bourne movie. It was no bullet train. But I had to be careful what I put on pictures because Karen and I's photo accounts are shared on Google. So yeah, this was smoke break, which means, oh, drone's in the air, time to get off the train. She was like, you don't look like you're very far from the train. Well, you know, if things start happening, people will move quickly. But that's another thing that was interesting to learn for me from my first trip, is where we take our cues from danger. So the organization that we travel with are extremely safety conscious. I mean, they have a security team of highly qualified people who approve every schedule of every day, everywhere we go. We are very monitored. They're watching us on phone constantly. We have to check in every day. This is not an improvised trip. So just so you know, I'll make some jokes that I probably shouldn't, but they're extremely safety conscious. But there's what your phone tells you, and then there's what the people in the room tell you. And the light bulb came on for me one day. I was listening to some NPR science broadcast, and they were talking about how we read faces. Every room you go into ever in your life, you're going to read the faces in the room, and the faces in the room are going to tell you whether you're safe or in danger, whether you have to fight, run, or whether you're comfortable. And that happens automatically since you were a baby. And the same thing happens if you're in a war zone. So if my phone comes off, it says, and my alarms are still on, so they're still going off. Danger, danger, take cover. And, they show you what's going on. But if you're in Ukraine, their phones are all going off too. And unless it starts getting loud, they're not running. They're not running to the basement. So the second level is the sirens outside, which would be like a tornado siren. And then people tune in. But the bottom line is you read the room, and the room tells you whether you're safe or not. And I just thought about that an awful lot. Like, what do people see on your face when they come to church? Do they see your eyes? Do they see a smile? Or anywhere. New kid in school, somebody moves into a neighborhood, guy's first day at work. This happens to all of us every day. And we really need to think about what our faces communicate to the people who are around us, because they communicate a lot. That's Steve. Michael Mudluff there in the center. He's a retired Iowa Presbyterian church guy, and he came through the same seminary I did, Trinity, so he'd always been familiar with the Free Church. And when he wrapped up 30 years at his church in Iowa, he now is traveling with Reach Global. They go to areas where pastors don't get much training and train them in expository preaching. Great guy. He came through the doors here on Thursday because he's back. He's at the point where he's doing about 4 trips a year. And he's got a buddy from his church who retired to Grand Rapids, and then he got Lou Gehrig's disease. So he came up to see him, and I got to show Michael around here for an hour, and we had coffee on Thursday. It was pretty cool. But he's probably got trouble with again. He's out of Des Moines, and a great guy. And this, I don't know if I can get this to play or not. This was our last night in Kyiv, and it was a Christian organ symphony. It was amazing. It was going through the story of creation by some modern composer. And it was in this historic Baptist church in Kyiv, and there was probably 600 or 700 people in there. It was huge. And it was amazing. And yeah, it's just, C.S. Lewis wrote an article, or he gave a speech called Learning in Wartime. And he was speaking to college kids who were wondering, should they keep on studying while the war's going on? Did it make sense? And his answer was kind of, the boys are fighting so you can keep doing normal things. So you can get married and build a house and have a job and study Latin or make music or do whatever you were meant to do. So it the concert was kind of a reminder of me of what we were created to do, and even in extraordinary circumstances. It's interesting for me as I go over there, frankly, a lot of folks are happy to talk about anything but the war. They're tired of the war. They'd rather talk about their garden and their grandkids, because we really were wired by the Creator to live in a garden, not in a war zone. And Lord willing, one day they'll get back to the garden. But in the meantime, they're still in a war zone, but they're still going to make music. And so I hope that's something for all of us, because we all go through our own zones, our own unbelievable circumstances, but we were made to be blessed. So hang on to that. Yeah, I guess I'm not able to play that for me. So, any questions? Thanks for the support, by the way. Thanks for all the team, leadership, staff. I couldn't have gone without everybody's green light, especially Kara's. Without her green light, none of this ever would have happened. I talked to God first, and then I talked to her. So thank you, honey. I appreciate it. And thank you to my mother-in-law and father-in-law. You were the inspiration behind it. I have a picture I will always treasure of my mother-in-law on the back of a Yamaha dirt bike, wearing heels and a dress. In Kenya, they call it a picky. And it's what we would call an Uber, only without like a roof. And so you're my inspiration. Bill? Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you had exposure to this or not, but when you hear that people, their apartment has been destroyed, they probably, like here, they probably have a mortgage, and they just pack up and they leave. What do people, how is their responsibility handling the situation? Is there, what happens? They just
I don't know the answer to that. I remember guys saying if your car gets blasted, the insurance company is like, doesn't cover acts of war. So what housing happens, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. But I don't know that there's many insurance policies that cover acts of war. So thanks for the prayers and thanks for tuning in. And I did post pretty regularly on Instagram, so I can see this is an Instagram crowd here. And but partly of the reason too, I did post on Instagram on purpose because I did want to engage young people particularly. And it was surprising the number who are kind of track and follow along with it. Because I just, partly, Americans historically have a short attention span, and there's a lot of other stuff in the news, and with all the war in Iran, that's really front and center. But, like I had a neighbor, and he's a good guy, and we've known each other for years, and he's like, are they still fighting over there? I'm like, yep, it is still going on. And particularly for our young people, I just want to say, hey, we have a lot of anxieties and worries and fears in our country, and that's, want to be sensitive to that. But hey, there's a big wide world out there. So be grateful for what you got and be open to whatever God would, have for you. And that would be my word too for anybody who's maybe over 40 is don't let the kids have all the adventures. Ask God if He's got something for you. And not everybody, most people aren't going to go to Ukraine. That's not everybody's cup of tea. But, if you're in the second half of life, if you're in the fourth quarter, I watch the ball games, and in the fourth quarter is when you play ball, right? So if you're not sure what to do in the fourth quarter, ask the coach and see if he's got an assignment for you. It'd be good. Mm-hmm.
Besides the
Dave.
Colombians jumping in there, is any other countries coming to the front lines and assisting them, or really hands-on?
I'm not aware of any in mass or in that quantity. There are miscellaneous. You do read stories of Canadians, Americans, and some Europeans and stuff who jump in, but it would be, a pretty small fraction of the big picture. The Russians have taken to hiring guys out of Africa, North Koreans in some significant numbers. And that kind of tells you where they're at in terms of their own recruiting base. If you got to hire, rookies out of poor countries because you're telling them you're going to give them citizenship and a job, you're in, that's an indicator of where you're at.
Did you get a feeling for what the Lord's overall arching Spirit is doing over there?
Mm-hmm. Building the kingdom. There, because of the war, there are Ukrainian worshiping congregations that have popped up all over Western Europe and in the U.S. and in Canada. My father-in-law, Art, did you say how many Ukrainian churches there were in the Twin Cities?
6 in Minneapolis.
Yeah. How many of you knew that? There's 6 Ukrainian congregations in the Twin Cities. And that would be true in cities all over the U.S. and Canada and Northern Europe. So what's God, he's doing what he was doing 2,000 years ago. Gospel, making disciples, planting churches. But the nations are being shaken. And like I said, I think it's going to be, it's going to be interesting to see what God does in Russia in the years ahead, because there will be a society-shaking ramifications from this war that didn't have to happen. Didn't have to happen. So, Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. This is an amazing turnout. I thought maybe if we had a few people, we'd have a good time, but you all are great. So thanks for your patience and coming out. And why don't I'll close this in prayer before we wrap it up. So let's just close in prayer. Lord, we do pray for Jesus to come. For your kingdom to come to completion. For the end of wrong and aggression and violence and animosity and insanity. We pray, Lord, for the people of Russia, that you would help them to know you and depend on you, and we would pray for massive change in their government and societal structure. Lord, we pray for Ukraine, that you would give them endurance and strength, Lord, not only for the war, but for the rebuild, and not only for rebuilding buildings, but families and marriages and friendships and churches that have all been broken. And Lord, we do pray the same in Iran and Israel and Lebanon. And we pray for ourselves, Lord God, that we would simply be open to whatever assignment you would want to give us. And Lord, that we would be happy to live in a small town, but that we would know that we live in a big world, and we'd be open to whatever assignments you have for us in that big world. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. 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 Thank you, Judith. You kept me alive. All right.
How big is Ukraine relative to a state?
Size of Texas, I want to say 90 million people.
Yeah.
Oh, what's that?
Oh, don't bend down.
That's all right.
Thanks. So yeah, about the size of Texas.
I was looking at the graph on trying to figure out what was like 200 miles, so it must have been about 500 miles across there.